Hello and welcome to this talk through of Language Paper 1, a paper we've put together to get you ready for your reading exam that you've got coming up. And this is a video that we've recorded for the summer of 2022 cohort, but it will translate to anyone watching it at another time. And we're going to focus on questions 1 to questions 5 based on an extract taken from the novel The Life of Pi. Now, the layout of Language Paper 1 is always an extract taken from a larger text, and then there's 5 questions which show a variety of skills. Question 1 is always a simple retrieval type question worth 5 marks and at easy points to gain. I see question 1 as like a landing question. It just eases you into the flow and ebb of an exam. Question 2 is also worth 5 marks and will be an impressions question. Then there will be 2 questions worth 10 marks each, which will be questions on writer's technique. This is looking at writers' intentions and the devices that they've used to create certain effect, and usually are phrased, how does the writer? And then question 5, the last question, it's always an evaluation question, another 10 marks. And you say basically how much you agree with a statement that's posed within the question. The video is based on this extract that you can see in front of you, which is taken from the book Life of Pi, and we're going to have assumed that you have read this text, or that you were before you've watched the video, or you are at least going to read it before you attempt the questions yourself. So the following passage is taken from the book Life of Pi, and in it a boy is stranded at sea on a lifeboat. His only company is a hyena, a zebra, an orangutan, and a 450-pound Bengal tiger, who's called Richard Parker, amusingly. In this extract, the tiger has just killed the hyena and has set his sights on the narrator, and the narrator is called Pi. So just to remind you of the timings of the paper, because the invigilators and the adults that are in the rooms will not be telling you when to move on, when to go on to the next question, or indeed when to finish the reading section and go on to the writing section of the paper. So you must manage your time as effectively as you can. With question 1, the retrieval question, we would say spend about 4 minutes on this. Obviously, if you're entitled to extra time, you would probably maybe spend between 3 and 5. Some of you are quicker and slower at these. These are on average. You know, make those amendments according to your own speed of writing. But ballpark, question 1, 4 minutes. Question 2, 6 to 7, because it does take a bit of planning and a bit of forethought to get those full 5 marks. Question 3, the first how question, worth 10 marks. We say between 13 to 15 minutes, but no longer than 15 minutes. The second how question, number 4, worth 10 marks, again 13 to 15 minutes. And question 5, the last question, do you agree, 10 marker, again 15 minutes. These are the questions that we're focusing on in this paper. List 5 things the tiger Richard Parker does in these lines, sorry. Question 2, how does the writer show the character of the tiger in these lines? So that's an impressions question based on the tiger. Question 3, how does the writer show the threat the tiger poses in these lines? Question 4, what do you think and feel about the narrator in these lines? And I've deliberately chosen this question because question 4 is a how question, but it's sometimes phrased how do you think and how do you feel, and you can still answer it as if you rephrase it, how is the narrator presented in these lines? Question 5 is the evaluation question, do you agree? And Our question 5 is, after reading this, a student said this is quite a tense moment in the text. Evaluate the way the writer creates tension in the whole passage. So general comments on paper 1, the reading section. We've got a separate video for the writing section. Too much time is spent on those low mark questions. Lots of students, and lots of you were guilty of this in your mock that you've just done on the Hamilton paper, spent too long on question 2 and then you ran out of time. Don't lead with language devices. Don't just feature spot and look for alliteration, similes, metaphors. We're meant to be talking about the meaning that is created and then identifying how that meaning is made and then labelling the features that have been made. The biggest feedback that came out, the biggest pattern of feedback between us all was more quotes are needed. You've got to pack in more evidence across the text in order to get those higher marks. And you should be focusing on 2 things: the content, what is being said, what is happening in that story, in that narrative, and also the way, the language, the way it's been put together and the way it's been built to recognise the impact of those particular words and phrases. So you look at what is being said and how, which then creates this overall impact of particular words and phrases. So let's get started on this extract then. These photos are all stills from the movie adaptation of the text. Question 1, it says which lines to focus on. Make sure you only take your evidence from the lines mentioned in the question. In this case, it's lines 1 to 6. List 5 things that the tiger Richard Parker does in these lines. Now, key information about question 1 is there's 5 marks available. Only spend 4 minutes and write in bullet points. Don't write in a continuous prose or a paragraph. You're just bullet pointing your 5 ideas. So Richard Parker does, what does he do? So this question's actually looking for actions. Sometimes this question is list 5 things you learn about a particular character, or what does the character look like? So really look for the clue in the question of what you're looking for. We're looking for what he does, so I'm focusing on verbs. Richard Parker let go and growled, but a quiet growl, private and half-hearted it seemed. He was panting, his tongue hanging from his mouth. He licked his chops, he shook his head, he sniffed the dead hyena. He raised his head high and smelled the air. He placed his forepaws on the stern bench and lifted himself. His feet were wide apart. The rolling of the boat, though gentle, was visibly not to his liking. He looked beyond the gunwale at the open seas. He put out a low, mean snarl. He smelled the air again. He slowly turned his head. It turned, 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 full round till he was looking straight at me. There is a screen grab of my paper. So I have highlighted. I had the luxury of having a highlighter and a pen. Don't panic, you can just use one or the other if you want to save time in the exam. But I've highlighted all of the things that he does, and I've double checked that I have got the right moments from that by underlining the verb. So he let go and growled, he was panting, he raised his head, he smelled the air, he placed his forepaws. He does give out a quiet growl, private and half-hearted, it seemed, but that is a description where he's half-hearted, not necessarily what he's doing. That's still him growling. So I would only reference growling once. And also the boat rolling visibly not to his liking. That's how Richard Parker's feeling. It's not what he's doing. So there's my paper, and there is how I have listed it in bullet points. And can you see it is full sentences? Richard Parker was panting, he licked his chops, he shook his head, he smelled the air again. So make sure you've got the full information in there. He did smell the air, yes, but he smelt it again, is the particular quote I was using. You could say he held his head high and smelled the air, or he smelled the air again and he growled. So that should be super easy. The way to improve this particular question is to just retrieve information against the clock, get as many past papers as you can, and just practice, practice, practice. Okay, question 2 is an impressions question. What the impression is of will depend on the paper, but this particular paper is the impressions of the character of the tiger. You want to spend about 6 to 7 minutes on this question, and we're focusing on the tiger. But the impressions part of it means the kind of view you might have of this place or person or character once you've read what you have said about them. Now, the key information for this particular question is it will ask you to show that you understand the writer's methods and techniques that have been used in order to create that impression on yourself, on the reader. Now, the impression question could be phrased in a way that could be a 10 marker. What impression do you get of the tiger? But it is usually question 2. So you just need to watch out whether it's a 5-mark impressions question at question 2, or whether it is a 10-marker one at question 3 or 4. With this particular paper, it's question 2, so it's only worth 5 marks. Use as many quotes as you can. Eduqas love you to track and pack. Those of you that watch AQA videos, it's a different type of exam spec. They look for you to really drill deep and explore language analysis as much as you can. You tend to write more about less in their language paper. In Eduqas, it's tracking through the text. Tracking through how your impressions are created, packing in as much as you can. So for 5 marks, again, 5 to 6, sort of 7 minutes there. Now, impressions are made through inference. And we're going to just remind ourselves what we mean by inference with this quotation here, not from the extract. They whispered as my cheeks went red. They whispered infers that the characters are being secretive about something. They don't want someone to hear, hence them whispering the quietened voices. Now, as my cheeks went red, this suggests that the character is embarrassed. We're used to hearing about people going red when they are actually ashamed or embarrassed. So they don't say the characters are being secretive. They don't say the character is embarrassed. They are showing us through the choices whispered and went red, so we can infer. They are showing us, not telling us. So the impression we get from this particular character is that they are embarrassed. And it's because possibly that there are people they think talking about them. Now, to structure your 5-mark answer, lots of you did really well with this in the mock, but you missed that opportunity to get the full 5 marks because you missed this overview, this sense of an overview, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. So link to the question, e.g., what is the impression you get of that character or place? Give your quotation, your evidence, and say how that evidence forged that impression that you got. Use 5 to 6 quotations if you can, but don't write out really long how and why paragraphs where you're drilling into alternative interpretations. We just want to track through 5 to 6 points and not huge paragraphs. So this is the question: how does the writer show the character of the tiger in these lines? You must refer to the text to support your answer and use relevant subject terminology where appropriate. I wish I could describe what happened next. not as I saw it, which I imagine, but as I felt it. I beheld Richard Parker from the angle that showed him off to greatest effect. From the back, half raised, with his head turned. The stance had something of a pose to it, as if it were intentional, even affected, a display of mighty art. And what art! What might! His presence was overwhelming, yet equally evident was the lithesome grace of it. He was incredibly muscular, yet his haunches were thin and glossy, and his haunches were thin and his glossy coat hung loosely on his frame. His body, bright brownish orange streaked with black vertical stripes, and was incomparably beautiful, matched with a tailor's eye for harmony by his pure white chest and underside and the black rings of his long tail. His head was large and round, displaying formidable sideburns, a stylish goatee, and some of the finest whiskers of the cat world, thick, long, and white. Atop the head were small, expressive ears shaped like perfect arches. His carrot orange face had a broad bridge and pink nose, and it was made up with brazen flair. Wavy dabs of black circled the face in a pattern that was striking yet subtle, for it brought less attention to itself than it did to one part of the face left untouched by it, the bridge, whose rufous lustre shone nearly with radiance. The patches of white rose above the eyes, on the cheeks and around the mouth, and came off as finishing touches worthy of a Kathakali dancer. The result was a face that looked like the wings of a butterfly and bore an expression vaguely old and Chinese. But when Richard Parker's amber eyes met mine, the stare was intense, cold, and unflinching, not flighty or friendly, and spoke of a self-possession on the point of exploding with rage. His ears twitched and then swiveled right around. One of his lips began to rise and fall, and the yellow canine thus coyly revealed was as long as my longest finger. There is a Kathakali dancer, just for reference there. It won't matter, it doesn't add particular meaning to the text if you don't understand a cultural reference point, because you can still find things that you can say. I just thought they were rather beautiful. Here is what my text looks like. So you can see I have read the text knowing that I am looking for evidence to show the character. What does the writer show about the character? What impressions do I get of the character in these lines? And I'm starting at the top. I've highlighted greatest effect. So we've got that superlative there, that the it's not just any old effect, it's the greatest one, that comparative to other things. The stance had something of a pose to it, as if it was intentional. And please get in the habit of just making little notes in the margin of what you can infer from that. And I can infer that it's almost as if Richard Parker's self-aware of his grace and power. It's like he's posing. It was intentional. That word intentional suggests he meant to do it. Affected, a display of mighty art. Mighty, that adjective suggests power. And what art? What might, that repetition of art suggests he's been created. And then I thought at that point there's other references to do with art, glossy and dabs. It's almost like he's been painted, that the narrator Pi feels like he's never seen such a beautiful, incredible being. It's like they've been constructed to be admired, to be looked at, as art is. His presence was overwhelming, so the impression I get of the character is the narrator's intimidating. He's so big, so beautiful, but beautiful and powerful, because you've got that grace. There's all of these juxtapositions of these positive words such as glossy and grace and the butterfly, but also with this huge, incredibly muscular, that adverb, incredibly emphasizing the power. That word formidable suggests that this is an absolute powerhouse. Going through, incomparably beautiful. He's got no reference point as pie to compare it to. Matched with a tailor's eye for harmony. It's like it's been perfectly being put together with these contrasts, and it creating this overall effect, something quite beautiful. You know, expressive little ears, perfect arches, really focused tiny details. The tiger has made quite an impression on the narrator. We are looking at this tiger through the eyes of the narrator, therefore we are going to be impressed. And then it shifts. I'm going to have to look at my notes on my phone. I can't see that on the screen there. So can you see how on the right hand side I've made a note of how I've tracked this chunk, and it starts beautiful and he's big and beautiful, but it shifts almost the tone that this thing to be admired actually comes with it a sense of threat, exploding with rage, cold, not friendly, the lips rising and falling, which in my mind makes me think of him snarling, especially as we know he's growling, and that yellow canine as long as the longest finger, that superlative. It's a really, you know, the longest finger you've got, the canine's as big as. So what is the impression that we get of the tiger overall? So come out of the text and think overall, what is the writer trying to say? And I think that we're meant to think they're beautiful and to be admired, but also that they pack with them this threat, this powerful threat to your life, actually. Now on the screen at the moment is one answer that you might get, and the sort of answers that we were getting in the mocks. You know, one impression I get of the tiger is he's beautiful and to be admired as he is described as mighty art by the narrator. Now this would get 1 mark. The student has given their opinion of the tiger and they've backed it up with a relevant quote. They've linked it to the adjective mighty, that metaphor describing the tiger as art, so they've inferred that it's something to be admired, but they've not written very much at all. They've literally written one thing. So here is what I've done. You've got the screenshot you can see of my notes that I made as I read through it, and then on the right you've got my response. I'm not even going to apologise that the only piece of paper I could find was my 8-year-old's Toy Story notepad. So that's Buzz Lightyear's rocket just jetting off on the outside. And I've kind of done this to show you that as long as you've got pen and a paper, you can revise. Pen, paper, past paper, you're fine. I could have worried and fussed and tried getting something better and thought, nah, that will do. That will do. Okay, here's my answer. The writer shows the tiger as something to be both admired and feared. It is powerful, beautiful, yet dangerous. The tiger is described as being in a stance which seemed like a pose, which could infer the tiger is self-aware of its grace and power. I've literally taken the notes that I've made and put them into a response. The writer describes the tiger as affecting a display of mighty art. In fact, repeating the reference to art emphasises the idea that the narrator believes the tiger to be constructed in a way to be admired. The references to painting with glossy and wavy dabs creates the impression the tiger is like a painting to be gazed at. The positive adjectives such as beautiful, stylish, perfect, harmony, expressive leave no doubt the tiger is an impressive animal, yet the shift to the stare being intense and cold with references to incredibly muscular leaves the impression of power and threat that the tiger has towards the narrator, that should say. Is it perfect? No, but I had 7 minutes to do it, and I've done as best I can. But hopefully you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I've got quite a lot of quotations in there, so I've tracked through, and I've started with this overall impression that the tiger gives and why. Here is a example of a response that only got 2 marks. This is off the Emma and Robbie paper that you would have done in year 10. The main reason why they only got 2 marks was there was limited coverage. They just only used 3 quotes, and they don't really go into a lot of detail as to how that impression was created. They say the writer presents a naive impression towards Emma, and they've used the verb, but they've gotten a bit of a muddle. This is an example from the same paper that got the full 5 marks, and you can just see how they start the answer with an overview. The writer presents Emma as someone who gets bored quickly and needs to explore adventure rather than settle down. They've then given 8 quotes, and they then focus on the writer and the terminology when it's appropriate used by the writer in order to create that impression. So it's really important that you use as many quotes as you can. So going back to mine, look, the overview, the writer shows the tiger as something to be both admired and feared. It's powerful and dangerous. I've got my embedded quotations. I've got at least 8 quotes in there. So it's up to you whether you want to now pause and have a go at writing this response yourself, or whether you want to carry on and then give yourself an hour to attack the paper in one lump. I personally think that would be a really good thing to do at least once before the mock, so you can practice your timings. Okay, question 3. So this is a 10 marker, and this is the first of our how questions. How does the writer show the threat the tiger poses in these lines? So you've really got to look at what the question is asking you here. It's not asking us to look at the tiger, it's asking us to look at the threat that the tiger poses in this particular lines. Now the how question, which will always be question 3, might be slightly different. Here are some examples. How does the writer make the reader feel sympathy or uncomfortable? How does the writer try to encourage or interest or argue about a particular point or topic? Depends what your text is. How does this text try to persuade the reader to feel a certain way about something? But the one we're looking at is how does the writer show the character of the tiger in these lines? When you're looking at a how question, you've got to explain why the quote that you have picked creates a certain meaning for the reader. So explain why you picked the quote, what the words, so you have to focus on single words, what they mean for the reader. Use as many examples and quotations as possible. Aim for 13 minutes. You may end up going over to 15, but aim for 13 to 15. I took 15 minutes. I'm going to be honest, I'm a bit slow. So with the 10 mark question, if it's a how 10 mark question, you look for 6 to 10 quotations for 13 minutes. Sometimes the how question, like I've said, if it's a 5 marker, like question 2, that's when you look between 4 to 6 quotes and 5 to 6 minutes. Terminology, although it does ask for subject terminology, it's not needed for every single point you make. So leave it out if you're unsure. Okay, if you can't remember a word, you're not sure what it is, leave it out, and it's not needed for every single thing you say. So when you're looking at a how question, you're commenting on the effect of the words. How do they make the reader feel? This is all to do with you showing writer's intention, the author's intention. The writer's deliberately using words to achieve a special effect on the reader. It might be that they're trying to show us that a character's sad. It might be that they're trying to show us that the character is excited. We can infer what the character is feeling or what the place is like through the words that have been deliberately chosen by the writer. Zoom in on keywords. Think Why that word in that place? So this is what we're looking for question 3. How does the writer show the threat the tiger poses in lines 25 to 38? So you focus just on lines 25 to 38. Every hair on me was standing up, shrieking with fear. That's when the rat appeared. Out of nowhere, a scrawny brown rat materialised on the side bench, nervous and breathless. Richard Parker looked as astonished as I was. The rat leapt onto the tarpaulin and raced my way. At the sight, in shock and surprise, my legs gave way beneath me and I practically fell into the locker. Before my incredulous eyes, the rodent hopped over the various parts of the raft, jumped onto me and climbed to the top of my head, where I felt its little claws clamping down on my scalp, holding on for dear life. Richard Parker's eyes had followed the rat. They were now fixed on my head. He completed the turn of his head with a slow turn of his body, moving his forepaws sideways along the bench. He dropped to the floor of the boat with ponderous ease. I could see the top of his head, his back, and his long, curled tail. His ears lay flat against his skull. In 3 paces, he was at the middle of the boat. Without effort, the front half of his body rose in the air and his forepaws came to rest on the rolled up edge of the tarpaulin. He was less than 10 feet away. His head, his chest, his paws so big, his teeth, an entire army battalion in a mouth. He was making to jump onto the tarpaulin. I was about to die. Now, there are loads of things that you could say to show the threat that the tiger poses. You could talk about the effect that the tiger has on the rat, for example. You could talk about how easy he moves, which we can infer the strength of this particular tiger. So the answers that I have gone for with my response isn't the only ones you could say. But we're looking for 5 to 7 quotes to show the threat the tiger poses, and that could be to either the narrator pie or the rat. So I focused on the every hair was standing up shrieking with fear. So the narrator's frightened, is physically reacting to this threat, because the previous section is the tiger's now, beginning to notice Pie. So the threat is becoming real, and the hair is standing up on head, so it's frightening him. Now, in the shock and surprise, the legs gave way beneath Pie, and I practically fell into the locker. And for me, I've taken that to infer that actually the threat is that he's easier to attack. He's become weakened. You may focus on, like I say, that the fact that the rat is desperately holding on to dear life. But Richard Parker's eyes had followed the rat. Now they're fixed on his head. That threat is now directed towards the narrator specifically. All are potential prey, both the boy and the rat. He's looking at them with intent to attack, I believe. The distance is mentioned. He was less than 10 feet away, so the distance is small. He can cover the body in 3 paces. I should probably, if I went back, I'll probably comment on the 3 paces. So he could easily attack the narrator. He was so big, his paws, the repetition and exclamatory sentences show the size difference between the rat and the narrator and the tiger. That metaphor, that military reference there, is the teeth again being mentioned, an entire army battalion. For me, it made me think of military, the power, the precision, the threat of an organised attack that you get with military. And then I was about to die. That short sentence is pretty matter of fact, which I think really nails the threat that the tiger poses to the narrator. If you're going for a grade 5 answer, so I'm going to show you the differences between a grade, you know, full marks and sometimes sort of half marks. Not everybody's going for a grade 9, not everybody's going for a grade 5, but just to make sure that you get that pass, use a quote and say what it shows about the tiger, specifically the threat. Use 1 or 2 sentences per quote where you're explaining the word choices in there, but don't waffle on loads and loads and loads. You need to track through as many quotes as you can and write 2 or 3 sentences per quotation. So 8, 5 or 7, 8 or 9 points or quotes. Again, I know I keep changing the numbers. It's like 5 to 7 if you're going for grade 5, 8 to 9 more points if you're going for grade 9. Not massive point, evidence, explain on one single quote. You need to track and pack through. So here's 2 chunks of my response. The tiger is shown to be a threat to the narrator as he is physically affected with being frightened. His hair is standing up, shrieking with fear. The personification of his hair shrieking emphasizes that even the narrator's hair is terrified by the tiger's presence. Or a bit later on, the narrator repeats the phrase "so big" to highlight the size difference between the tiger and the boy, clearly indicating the threat this predatory animal can have on a young boy. Probably should have used the word narrator, but never mind. The exclamatory sentences indicate a heightened sense of fear in the narrator, showing the reader the boy believes the tiger to be a real threat. So both of these are examples where I've given a quote and I've written a couple of sentences to tell us what the quote shows us about the tiger posing a threat. So you want 4 or 5 of those to get a 5, and there's subject terminology in those. That is my full answer. That took me, again, full disclosure, 14 minutes, this one. It's not perfect at all. I wanted to rewrite it, but I'm trying to be as raw and as real with you as possible. There's Woody's badge down the bottom. So let's read this out. The tiger is shown, I can't actually see it on my screen. The tiger is shown to be a threat. I think I can't see it because of my screen. The narrator, a threat to the narrator as he's physically affected with being frightened. His hair is standing up, shrieking with fear. The personification of his hair shrieking emphasizes that even the narrator's hair is terrified by the tiger's presence. This is further exemplified with the collapse of the narrator. My legs gave way beneath me, highlighting not only does the narrator believe the tiger to be a threat, but the fact that he's now collapsed infers to the reader that the tiger is even more of a threat to the terrified narrator. The rat comes onto the scene to show the reader that the tiger sees both rat and human as prey. Eyes had followed the rat. They were now fixed on my head. There is no doubt in the reader's mind that the tiger is hungry and wanting to eat, be it rat or boy, showing the threat. Distance is mentioned as being small, less than 10 feet away. The comparative verb less emphasizes the short distance, so the reader is aware, as is the narrator, that the tiger is merely a leap away and a real threat. The narrator repeats the phrase "so big" to highlight the size difference between the tiger and the boy, clearly indicating the threat this predatory animal can have on a young boy. The exclamatory sentences indicate a heightened sense of fear in the narrator, showing the reader the boy believes the tiger to be a real threat. The teeth of the tiger are compared to an entire army battalion by the narrator. The writer has used this military metaphor to indicate the power, precision and purpose that the jaws or teeth have, as this is what a reader would infer from a battalion. There is not a doubt the teeth will be a real threat to the boy or rat's life should they be deployed in attack. This imminent sense of threat is compounded by the final short statement, declarative sentence spoken by the narrator: "I was about to die." The tone of this seems almost accepting of the threat that this tiger poses to the narrator. So it's not perfect, but it does the job. And you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 7 there. Why do you need so many quotes? And there's 2 examples on the board, which I'm not going to read through. I'll let you pause if you want to. But the students that only use like 4 quotes show limited range of understanding of the different techniques and methods used by a writer to create a certain effect. So the one on the left there, 4 quotes, got 3 marks out of 10. The one on the right was 11 quotes, and there was a lot of argument whether they've got 9 or 10 marks. So I'll let you pause this and read through this should you wish, based on the Emma and Robbie extract. Zooming in if you want to pause and read that, but 2 quotes is not enough. That's a bit longer. 4 quotes, and again you can pause this if you want to read it. That's going to get you 5 marks. It's not enough if you're wanting to get a grade 5 overall. 8 to 10 marks, and they've used 9 quotes. Okay, so I'll let you pause them and read the structure of those should you wish. So just to remind you, explain why you've picked the quote and what that word means for the reader. Use as many examples as possible in the time given. Now, question 4, it's another how question, and it's worth 10 marks, but sometimes it's phrased think and feel. What do you think and feel about the narrator in these lines? So you can, if you get one that reads like this, it's essentially another how question, but you can rephrase it. How does the writer create an impression of the narrator in these lines? How do you think and feel is the same as impressions? This is what I mean by the impressions question can sometimes be the 5 marker, question 2, or in this one, think and feel. What impressions do you get of the narrator in these lines? But the tarpaulin's strange softness bothered him. He pressed at it tentatively. He looked up anxiously. The exposure to so much light and open space did not please him either, and the rolling motion of the boat continued to unsettle him. For a brief moment, Richard Parker was hesitating. I grabbed the rat and threw it his way. I can see it in my mind as it sailed through the air, its outstretched claws and erect tail. Richard Parker opened his mouth and the squealing rat disappeared into it like a baseball catcher's mitt. Its hairless tail vanished like a spaghetti noodle sucked into a mouth. He seemed satisfied with the offering. He backed down and returned beneath the tarpaulin. My legs instantly became functional again. I leapt up and raised the locker lid again to block the open space between bow bench and tarpaulin. Not going to lie, when I first read this question, because I panic in exams, I'm very honest and open about that. This is why I have to centre myself and annotate and come back to the question and give myself permission to take time to check I know what I'm doing. And when I read this, the question's focusing on the narrator, and I felt like the description was mainly on Richard Parker and then the rat. And then I just had to think, come out of the text, this is first person narration. So yes, we're talking, the narrator's focusing on the tiger because it's from his point of view. So our impression of what the narrator is talking about is where I'm going to go with this answer. What impression do I get of the narrator based on what they are reporting on, what they're seeing, because it is that first person. So I was mindful I was running out of time here. So I only gave myself 13 minutes for this one. But so how, so question 4 can often be feelings, but also it can talk about how do they make it exciting and dramatic. I'm going to show you an exciting, dramatic attention one later. But anyway, so that's just a note to you about exciting and dramatic is often a question for question 4, but often is feelings. But again, it's that what impression do you get of the narrator? And I'll come back to exciting and dramatic. Okay, here are my annotations. Looking back, I have missed out things that I could have talked about. You will see I've done a big error. The last sentences I haven't touched, and that is a big no-no. I should have leapt up. They actually leapt up. They instantly became functional again, and I'm quite cross, but such is life. Right, so tracking through the text, I noticed, so I looked at the narrator as a whole, and actually for him to observe the tiger in the way he did shows that he was really calm. So he's quite perceptive. He watches the tiger closely and he spots this subtle shift in the tiger's behaviour, which shows he's mature and actually that he might become safe. You know, he's noticed the tarpauling's bothered him, the tiger's touching it tentatively, he's looked up anxiously, he's unsettled, he's hesitating. So you can see my notes there. That's quite perceptive of the narrator. So I had to make that decision as a student, thinking, oh my goodness, Richard Parker's been described, but he's been described through the narrator, and the narrator's observed this, which shows he's managed to stay calm, which I thought was quite astute of him, actually. He's quite resourceful and opportunistic. So he's grabbed the rat and he's thrown it, and he's thought really quickly it was fight or flight, and he's chucked this rat towards him. I personally wouldn't think to grab a rat. You tend to be repulsed by them, so it shows that he's quite resilient. But even though that act saved him, it still affects him. It is fight or flight, but he's not a killer, because I can still see it. I still see it in my mind's eye, which makes me think he reflects on this, and this little moment haunts him still. The baseball reference and the spaghetti noodle sucking up, we can all get that vivid picture in our minds. We've all done it. And I thought, well, this is odd. That's kind of broke the tension, feels a bit odd for me. And then I thought, actually, it's a young narrator. That's the point. It's meant to. I think the writer showing this extraordinary situation that this young chap is in, and surviving in, but that young man only has known references such as baseball and spaghetti because he's not that worldly wise. So overall, we admire his tenacity and quick thinking and ability to survive, and we're aware of how young he is, but this experience no doubt forces him to grow. I should have talked about the fact that his legs have come back, so physically he was quite resilient as well. So here is my answer. I think I can't actually see, it's cut off. I think the narrator shows tenacity, quick thinking, and the ability to stay calm in a stressful situation. I feel that despite the narrator's maturity, they are still very young and struggling to make sense of the extraordinary situation of being stuck in a small boat with a 450-pound Bengal tiger. The narrator is maintaining a calm stillness to allow this to occur. The verbs that the narrator uses to describe the tiger shows the reader that the tiger is hesitating and has had the chance to react. The tiger is observed to be bothered and acting tentatively, and this adverb seems to be in contrast with the narrator's currently calm state. The narrator, I feel, shows a resourcefulness as he sacrifices the rat. The verb grab suggests this happens quickly, and the declarative short sentences create a decisive tone about the narrator. Grabbing a rat is not an instinctive act, as they are usually revulsed, and sacrificing animals is also not an everyday act. I feel that despite the resourcefulness that ultimately led to the narrator's survival, and then I remembered actually the first person past tense of the aspect of the text lets me know that ultimately he survived, but it still haunts him. I can still see it in my mind. The adverb still highlights the impact that this has had on the young boy. I think the narrator copes admirably in a difficult situation, but is clearly a child, repetition, and therefore vulnerable. And linking of the situation of rat and tiger to the familiar knowns of baseball and spaghetti highlight to the reader that this is a young man trying to make sense of the situation. And I feel that the writer wants us to know that despite maturity and being forced to grow up quickly, they're still vulnerable and the dangers have not fully elapsed. So I do feel like I lost control a little bit. I haven't asked my team to mark this yet. I don't know what mark I'd give it, but it's definitely in that top band. I've got 7 quotations, could have used more. I've got subject terminology. There is an overview of the narrator. I've focused on the question and there is an awareness of the writer's intentions. So although that's not, I don't know if I'd give that a 10, I don't know, but it's up there. That's definitely an 8 or 9. And I did what was necessary. We're there. Last question. Okay. The last question always wants you to look at the passage as a whole. That is the absolute core to getting the full marks available for this. There's always some kind of statement that they want you to agree with. After reading this, a student said, this is quite a tense moment in the text. Honestly, I've never seen a question where it's asking you to evaluate the tension. Normally, question 3 would be, how does the writer create tension in this extract? Question 4 would be, you know, what impressions you get of the narrator, or what are your feelings towards the narrator? And question 5 might be, after reading this, a student said that the narrator is someone to be admired, but they've decided to I'm just trying to show you as many different types of questions that could come up, but allowing you a way to navigate through them. So although this is asking you tension, and you might get the tension question 3, what we're looking at are the skills that you need to use for question 5. And this question 5 is, it's a tense moment in the text. So you're going to evaluate the way the writer creates the tension in the whole passage. And I'm telling you now, if you are wanting to get top marks for this, you agree with the statement. It's much, much easier. You write about your thoughts and feelings about the way tension is created. Sorry, I've jumped to the slide there. And you write how they've created. Always the last one at the bottom. So the same thing, 10 marker, 13 to 15 minutes. I did this one again, full disclosure, I ran out of time, so I gave myself 13 minutes. Just agree with the question. Look for the 7 to 10 quotes that show what it is you're trying to back up in your argument that you're agreeing with. And for us in this one, it's tension. Look at the question on the passage as a whole, but make sure you have at least 1 point from the very end. Because if you think we've chronologically tracked through the text, the examiners are looking for you to talk about the very end, as well as the passage as a whole. Try and use the peach structure, which if you're in my class, I definitely know you're aware of it. If you're in another class, you might not, and I'm going to talk you through that now. If your teacher has shown you a different structure for question 5 that works for you, don't use the peach structure. I'm just sort of going with what I know. And also, those that get your full marks show an awareness of a counter argument. You can argue against the statement, but overall you're going to agree with it. Okay, so your peach, to structure it, it's a bit like what, how, why, but because the evaluation question is asking you to agree or disagree with a statement, you've got to build an argument in there, and that's why we just talk about peach. So it's the same thing. You make your point, you've got your evidence, you know, how do you know that, but then you've got to argue how that evidence backs up your point of why you're agreeing with the statement. And then you focus on a choice of words. You don't have to use subject terminology for question 5, but you do have to show that you are aware how single words and phrases are used to create a specific effect. The one we're looking at is tension. So here is an example of a peach point that I made. The writer uses short sentences to build pace and urgency. Evidence, I was about to die. argue the tone is matter of fact and declarative statement makes it seem as if it was inevitable. The fact that the narrator thinks he's going to die builds tension. Choice of words, drilling down, zooming in. The word die is quite final. The reader will want to read and find out what actually happens to the narrator in the end. So that's what I mean by peach, and you want between 5 and 7 of those. I cannot stress this enough. Always agree. It's easier to present an argument. You're going to show the counter argument, and the students that get the top marks agree. They prepare that they want you to agree. You're not going to lose marks if you disagree and you argue it, absolutely, if that is where your heart sings, but it's been set up in a way that you're meant to agree. It's just easier. So 7 to 10 quotes. A way of tackling this question, if it confuses you a bit, is just rephrase it. Do I think it's tense? So this question is, after reading this, the student said, this is quite a tense moment. Evaluate the way they create. Do I think it's tense? Which words and phrases make you think or feel that? If the question is, after reading this, a student said, I admire the narrator, you can rephrase it. Do I admire the narrator? What words and phrases makes us think we admire the narrator? An evaluation question could be, after reading this, a student said, the tiger is quite an impressive animal and to be admired. Think, I think it's an impressive animal and to be admired. And it's as if you agree with it, but that way in might help you. But you've got to start with, I agree. I agree with the writer, or I agree with the statement. So here's a screenshot again of my paper, and the big bits in the circles is what I have done to tackle this because it's structure. So I'm looking at the order that things are presented in as a whole, as opposed to getting bogged down in the nitty-gritty, because it's to do with tension, that's to do with structure. So I don't know if you can see, I've put a big circle around the fact. The intro is the book The Life of Pi is actually set, this kid is in a lifeboat with a tiger. That is quite stressful. It starts with a growl. He can't describe what happens next. We've got all the description of the tiger, and the description shifts to a threat. That builds tension because we know the threat's becoming real. The fear builds up. The tiger's then actually looking at his head. The narrator thinks he's about to die. So I've tried tracking through the action, the content, and then I will then look for quotations to back up to focus on the language choices. So it starts in a tense setting situation. There's a boy on a boat with a Bengal tiger. It's a lifeboat, which suggests they've already had a capsized ship. The narrator struggles to describe what they saw, so they focus on their feelings. They're quite overwhelmed. That builds up tension because we know that the narrator's overwhelmed. The focus then goes to the tiger. The tiger's described in a way to build tension. The threat increases as we're aware of the size of the tiger and him looking back. The fear intensifies. He thought he was going to die. This is my plan. I have to plan question 5. I literally just scribbled this down, but I'm super lucky I can write quick. But you'll notice that my handwriting really deteriorates as we go through. So consider the text as a whole, track through and seek changes or pivotal moments, have a counter argument in mind and address it, and conclude with the text as a whole. I don't know if you can see my plan there. The settings tense, the tiger's a threat to life. We look at the size of it, then we go to the strength, and then the threat becomes real as the eyes go to the narrator. The narrator physically struggles. We want to know whether they'll survive or not, and the contrast between the size of the tiger and the size of the narrator. The counter argument is, it's in the past tense, we know this 5. The reference to noodles. I think the noodles and baseball are used to show vulnerability, and although we know it survives, it's still tense and exciting. So that's my plan, and there is my answer. It goes over 2 pages, which I will read out to you, and you'll see I've made mistakes and it's not brilliant, but here we go. I agree that this is quite a tense moment, as the writer has created a setting that in itself is tense. A boy on a lifeboat with a tiger. The writer also develops the tension by focusing on the size of the tiger in contrast to the narrator and the increasing threat that the tiger poses to the narrator's life. I'd written boiler and I thought, actually, it's the narrator. Be specific, Mrs. Merry. From the start of the extracts, we track through. Tension is established with the fact the tiger growls, a sound that is used to show warning or displeasure. The focus the tiger's doing with clues that he's hungry for fresh meat. He licked his chops, which in turn changes the focus of the tiger's attention to the narrator looking straight at me. So the reader, by the end of the first paragraph, senses increased tension as the narrator could be the tiger's next victim. And with that paragraph, you see, I haven't formed a perfect peach. I've got the point, it's established because he's unhappy, the tiger's unhappy. Got my evidence there. I've got my word choice, and I do argue why, but it doesn't follow the exact peach structure. But as long as you're doing and showing those skills, it doesn't matter. The description from the tiger establishing the size, which adjectives show it is incredibly muscular and formidable, not friendly, which in itself builds tension. As the reader knows, this large beast, which is hungry, is on a small boat. The focus of description moves to specifics such as the yellow canines, which are as long as my longest finger, establishing a shift from the tiger as a whole to a predator who wants to use those teeth on the narrator. So I think I was trying to show there was a shift in focus of it just being a creature to be admired to actually it's a killing machine, but I didn't make that very clear there, but never mind. The tension further increases through the description of the tiger, then moving his eyes until they were fixed on the narrator's head. This infers the prey is locked in the predator's sight. The fact we know the size and power of the animal, tension is built as we assume unfair fight. The narrator themselves are described in a way which builds tension and establishes this as a tense moment as they physically react to the situation. Their hair shrieks with fear, their body can no longer stand and legs gave way, indicating an inability to resist an attack, thus adding to the tense moment. The narrator cannot describe what happened next, but can only relay what they felt, inferring how much of an impact this tense moment has had. Also stating simply, that should say, I was about to die, is as tense as it gets. The finite resolution of the word die is very tense, as we want to know what will happen next with the tiger. There are moments in the text which break the tension, here's my counter argument, or could make it seem less tense, such as referring to the rat being like that in baseball and the rat being eaten like spaghetti. I think, so I'm arguing my point again, that this is due to the vulnerability and young age of the narrator, who has limited life reference points, which in fact, in turn, adds to the tension of the moment, as it is a minor alone left to fight for their life. In conclusion, I feel this is a tense moment, both due to the setting, situation, and the way the writer focuses on establishing the size and threat of the tiger. I've repeated myself, in contrast to the young and frightened narrator. There you go, rough, raw and ready. 13 quotations were in there, often one word and embedded. I focused on the question that it's a tense moment. I tracked through the whole text. I've considered the writer's intention. I have actually made the objective points around the structure and look at the focus shifts. I tried following the peach structure and I've allowed to focus on single word, and I've argued how that word builds tension. I've argued the reason why I agreed, and I showed the counter argument. So is it perfect? No. Does it do the job? Yes. So that's it. Our walkthrough of language paper 1. There is you. Imagine you are Pi, the narrator, and language paper 1 is Richard Parker, and you are there with your mighty pen like a sword ready to slay. Keep calm like Pi. Be observational. Look out for the little changes in word choices and language. Just give yourself permission to breathe and enjoy it. You know where we are if you've got any questions. We'll be there in the morning to settle you in. All the very best, Year 11. We'd have that nice awkward moment where I'm waiting to stop recording.